Joel, one problem that every single major wrestling promotion seems to have is that they all have way too many titles. You look in WWE, you look in AEW, and even internationally in NJPW and CMLL, they just have too many championships. Joel, if you had your way, what titles would you eliminate and why?
Let's go back in time a little bit, a few decades. If you look at the 1980s wrestling war, before the Monday Night Wars, we go back to the golden age, the 80s, and you've got Vince McMahon and the WWF on one side, and on the other side you've got Jim Crockett, and you've got the NWA. NWA was a territory system, but the NWA on TV, the flagship promotion, they had TV on the Turner networks. And at that time, WWF not so heavy on the hardware. In the 80s, really, to a casual fan, all they're really seeing is the main belt, the top World Heavyweight Championship that Hulk Hogan had for so long. And then they had their tag team titles, and they had a secondary individual title, the Intercontinental title. And really, that was it. Whereas with the NWA, you not only had individual titles, you had tag team titles there. If you loved hardware, you preferred the NWA because they didn't just have, for example, for tag teams, the World Tag Team title, like WWF did, a tag team title they called the World Tag Team title. But in the NWA, they also had secondary. They had the United States Tag Team title. And they also had six-man belts, like AEW has now, in AEW proper and also in ROH. But you had six-man belts in the NWA, which you did not have in the WWF. In the NWA, you also had the TV title, whereas the WWF never had a television title. And then in the NWA, even in 87, 88, for a year or so, you had the Western States Heritage title. Larry Zbyszko held it, Barry Windham held it. So it seemed like there was a lot more hardware in the NWA. Now, the war right now that WWE is in, if you want to look at it that way, is with AEW. And AEW, when it comes to belts, to the untrained eye, or really just psychologically, you might say to yourself, well, there are a lot of belts for individuals, there are a lot of kind of sub-primary belts, and it might seem like AEW is following in that format, in that vein of NWA, WCW, rather than WWF, WWE, in that there are more titles. It's not necessarily true. In AEW, you do have 5 singles titles, but also you have a total of 9 titles. You have the 5 singles titles, you have tag team titles and trios titles, so they've got 6-man titles where the WWE doesn't. You've also got 2 women's titles. Really, there are nine titles across the board. Now, may seem like that's more than WWE, but that's psychological because AEW breaks up their product by branding TV titles, by series. The differences within AEW are that you've got Dynamite, Rampage, and Collision, and they're all kind of branded AEW, and they're not different colors, and they're not different kind of product brands. Kind of the way the circus used to have a red team and a blue team, that's WWE. In WWE, it might seem at first like there are fewer titles because there is Raw and there is SmackDown. And Raw has its 4 titles, an individual title, a secondary individual title, a tag title, and a women's title. Just like SmackDown also has 2 singles titles for men, a women's title, and tag team titles. But WWE also has a 9th title. They've got women's tag team that AEW doesn't have. That's unbranded Raw or SmackDown. So that's their 9th title. And if you want to go even further, for their digital and social media, WWE now has the Speed Championship. And that Speed title, believe it or not, if we're comparing one-to-one, apples to apples, that Speed title is their 10th title, which means not counting NXT on the WWE side and not counting ROH on the AEW side, WWE 10-9 actually has more titles than AEW. Now, which titles in and of themselves, one-to-one, line item, would I do away with? I don't look at it that way. I don't think any of them are useless, not worthwhile, excessive, redundant. I don't think any of them are worthless unless they're presented that way. If you can book and use these titles as a device, as a vehicle, as a trope, I think all of these titles, you could have as many titles as you want. You could have 10 like WWE, you could have 9 like AEW. That's not what bothers me so much. What bothers me is when the title, when a championship is devalued. When I see any given championship too often. If I'm seeing a championship defended on free TV every week or every 2 weeks even, it's devalued. And then, number of championship matches on one show. Especially AEW. If you've got a show, a format like Battle of the Belts, then that's one thing. And if it's going to be 2 hours, 3 hours long, then it's okay, I guess, to have 3, 4, maybe even 5 matches for titles on the show, because the name of that show is Battle for the Belts. But on your regular weekly TV, whether it's Collision, Rampage, or even your bread and butter flagship show, the motherlode for AEW, Dynamite, on Wednesday night, 2 hours. Even for Dynamite, if I'm seeing 4, 5, if I'm seeing too many different championship matches on free TV, it's telling me that these championships don't mean anything. Remember, not every wrestling fan just started watching wrestling a year or two ago. Not everyone is 18 years old. Some of them are older and have been watching wrestling for 30, 35, 40 years. These are people who grew up on squash matches. They were happy to get a title match on TV, period. Every one was a big deal. So even if you've got Dynamite, your big show, and even if it's 2 hours long, there's no need to have 4 different title matches on one episode of Dynamite. That's the only issue I have with too many titles. Other than that, if they can be booked compellingly, if they can be booked intriguingly, have as many titles as you want. Have 10, have 11 within your promotion. Just juggle them and book them the right way. Govern yourself accordingly. Variety is the spice of life, and your titles will thrive. So, Grant, that's what I think, and thank you for asking.